All right, y'all. We are jumping in to Exodus 11 through most of 13 this evening. We're going to stop at verse 15 or 16 of chapter 13, 16. And this is really the way out. Exodus is called. It means the way out in Greek, and so this is when they actually get out of Egypt, and it's the last plague, and all the way up to the crossing of the Red Sea. And we're going to stop there, and then we're going to talk about the Red Sea more next week, and that whole adventure. So last week we went over the plagues as signs to Pharaoh and the people of Egypt that Yahweh is the one true God, and how the plagues were direct conflict and confrontation to the idolatry of the people of Egypt. And so after the plague of darkness, Pharaoh refused to let the people go again. And it says in 10:28, Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." And just as you say, Moses replied, "I will never appear before you again." And then so chapter 11 picks up like right in that same scene, but there's a little introductory piece that can make it feel a little disjointed. And so 11:1 is talking about a event where the Lord had spoken to Moses prior to this meeting, and then after. So 11:4 picks up with Moses addressing Pharaoh again. So it's all the same conversation that we're having from 10:29 to 11:4 with a little interlude for a previous event. So as I was reading through this, I was like, that's really disjointed. What's happening here? So I did a little diagramming of how it all works out. So let's jump into 11:1 and see what the Lord is going to do here as he's liberating his people. Now the Lord had said to Moses previously, before the meeting with Pharaoh, "I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people." So Moses said, now speaking to Pharaoh still, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight, I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or will ever be. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any person or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, 'Go, you and all the people who follow you.' After that, I will leave." Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. The Lord had said to Moses, "Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you." So now we're back to the Lord speaking to Moses separately from that confrontation with Pharaoh. "Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt." Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country. All right. So in this confrontation, we have God speaking to Moses, Moses speaking to Pharaoh, and then a recap of all that has happened in the plagues leading up to this point. And the purpose being, God is displaying his power over Pharaoh and over all of creation. And there are some interesting notes in this. The ninth plague was the essentially the defeat of the sun god. And the sun god was believed to be the father of Pharaoh. And so here we have the ninth plague. The Lord is defeating the sun god, the father of Pharaoh. And now the Lord is going to bring a plague against the sons, the firstborn sons of everybody in all of the Egyptian lands. And in particular, Pharaoh's sons. The firstborn in Pharaoh's house is not immune from this. But before getting too far into the plague, God, we get this interlude saying, like, the Lord telling Moses what to do, saying, like, you, all of the people of Israel, you need to go and ask the Egyptians for their stuff, for their gold, for their jewelry, for their treasures, because they will be well regarded. And the way that you read that well regarded is not necessarily like, man, we love these Hebrew people, but to say like, no, we believe that you are powerful. We believe that the Lord is with you. And so they trust the word and of Moses over the word of Pharaoh. And there is a breaking happening between the people of Pharaoh and the Pharaoh and the people of Egypt. Pharaoh is holding on to power, and he's trying to convince himself and the world that he can keep the Israelites, that he can assert dominion over them. But they are seeing more and more that Pharaoh is powerless against everything that Moses says and does, and that the Lord is doing these things. And so they are favorably disposed toward the people. And even the end where Pharaoh says, or Moses says, like, all of your officials will come to me bowing down before me saying, go, you and all the people. Like, everybody except Pharaoh is essentially on the same page. Like, the Israelites should leave. It would be good for all of us if they would go, and we want to help them go. And so Pharaoh's kind of on his own island here of his own arrogance and pride. And so this last warning of the plague on all the firstborn is it's dire. Like, every firstborn in every house, and it goes from Pharaoh's house all the way to the slave who is at her handmill. So it's every stratification of society is going to be affected by this. But the Lord also is making a clear distinction between Egyptians and the Israelites, that nowhere in the Israelite lands are they going to have these experiences. And that's because the Lord is going to give the people of Israel clear instructions on what to do in just a few moments here. And so there's a couple interesting little notes as well. One of the fun languages here is, but among the Israelites, not a dog will bark, in verse 7. The idiom there is in the Hebrew is, not a dog will sharpen their tongue. I just thought that was an interesting way to, like, talk about dogs barking, because having two dogs, like, most of the time they are so sweet and they are so, like, just wonderful, from a dog owner's perspective. But when they do get mad or territorial, like, their barking is alarming and it is sharp. Like, it sounds like they want to hurt you. They don't. They really just want to say hi and see if you have snacks. But in this, culture, like, they didn't have dogs as pets. And so the dogs were seen essentially as, like, large rats. And so, like, they would go around and they would bark and they would cause a ruckus and everything. And for the people of Israel in their region, like, it was going to be such a calm night that dogs aren't even barking. They're all sleeping. They're all restful. There's nothing that the people of Israel will have to worry about if they follow these things that the Lord tells them to do. Whereas in Egypt, there will be great wailing and sorrow. And so the contrast is sharp between what's going to happen this night. So let's jump into chapter 12. The people are going to be begging the people of Israel to leave after everything that happens, and we'll see that all of the stuff that Moses said, that the Lord told Moses, is what comes to be. So these are the instructions for Passover, as well as for what will become known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so, so let's jump in. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year." And this is the month of Nisan. And so the people of Israel had two New Years, essentially. They had the Passover, which was like the New Year for the religious or the civil New Year, and then they also had the New Year in the fall. Like Rosh Hashanah means head of the year, and so like they have essentially two New Years. That's the religious New Year. So they have a civil New Year and a religious New Year. This is the month of Nisan. Now, interestingly, this is not necessarily about this book, but when we have been going through Nehemiah got approval from Artaxerxes to go back to the land and start building the wall of Jerusalem in the month of Nisan. And so it's just interesting little connection. Like this is the month where they were able to leave. And so I wonder if Nehemiah maybe was praying and fasting leading up to Passover, and then he had the opportunity to talk to Artaxerxes to say, "I want to go and build the wall," and that's when he got the permission. Could be. So this is the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some of it is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it: with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So these instructions here, some of the key elements of the instructions for the meal, like the year-old lamb, and it could be a sheep or a goat. That word lamb is interchangeable in Hebrew between year-old sheep and year-old goat. And one of the interesting notes here is they selected on the 10th of the month. They care for it for 4 days. And over tradition and over the years, there's tradition that they would treat it like a pet, like bring it into the house. And years after this, they would then bring the lamb to the priests. Right now, this is all happening in the house, in the household. And so they would bring the lambs to the priest, and the priest would look at the head of the household after the family had been caring for this lamb for 4 days. Like it's their lamb. They love this lamb. And the priest would look at them, the household, and say, "Do you love this lamb?" And this lamb is supposed to be a not just an animal to them, but it's like they've made it a part of their family. And they say, "Yes, we love this lamb." And then they would go through the preparation for slaughter and sacrifice for the Passover. And the lamb is also supposed to be shared. Like they're supposed to have enough lamb for their household. And if they don't have enough, then they share with the next household over. There's not supposed to be any waste from the lamb. And so they want to make sure that they're eating all of the edible meat from this lamb. They're not to break any of its bones. They are also, like even the way that they eat it, like they roast it over a fire. They don't boil it because boiling it would take too long. And so they roast it over the fire. And as you read through, you're like, roasted over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. That is not saying that they were eating all of these, the heads and the organs and all that stuff, but they are burning all of it in the fire. Like they would slaughter it appropriately and burn it all in the fire, and then they would eat the edible meat. They would probably take all the organs out and burn those separately, but on the fire. So just so like there's some weird things as you just read through, like, are they eating like all of the stuff, like the intestines and stuff? No, they're not. So they are cleaning it properly, eating it properly, but they're supposed to eat in such a way where they are in a hurry, because the Passover, this event that's going to happen around midnight, is going to happen quick, and they need to be ready to go. And so they're eating with their coats on, their shoes on, and a staff in their hand, ready to make this happen. Also, they have already like painted the door frame with the blood of the lamb over the door frame. And so this is all of these things are symbols for them and reminders for them that it is the blood of this lamb that protects them from the angel of the Lord that's going to come through. Or even as we say here in verse 12, on the same night, I will pass through Egypt. So the Lord was passing through Egypt to strike down the firstborn. So that blood over the doorpost is the sign to the Lord that this household has followed these instructions. So let's keep going. Verse 12. On the same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you of the houses where you are, and I will see the blood. I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses, for whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the seventh must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another on the seventh day. Do no work at all on these days, except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Celebrate the feast, the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought you your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month, you are to eat bread made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days, no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast. Wherever you live, you must eat unleavened bread. So the Lord says, I'm going to pass through, and you will be protected because of the blood on the doorpost. And then he gives this instruction for the yeast, cleaning out the yeast, celebrating unleavened bread. And the symbolism here is that like leavening bread takes time. And so they are not like the Passover is a festival of movement, of things happening, and even unleavened bread, like they didn't have enough time for the bread to rise, and so like they're remembering what God has done, and so like taking all of the yeast out of their houses is a symbol for them of, yes, it's a symbol of the urgency of the feast of what happened in this event, but yeast also comes to be seen as a symbol of sin, and how sin spreads throughout how the light our lives is, like how yeast works its way through the whole dough and expands and grows, and so it's got a symbolism that is beyond just yeast is bad. It's like, no, it's like, what is the yeast in us and doing for us and through us? So take some time to clean your house and take all the yeast out. And so then you're like, but what about this sourdough starter that I started in COVID? And like everybody, like, it's so good. Like, do I have to get rid of that? Yeah. You'd have to clear all that stuff out. And so one of the interesting things too is like when this is happening is springtime. And so over time, we have this tradition in our culture of spring cleaning, and some of us are better at spring cleaning than others. I never want to do spring cleaning. But there is a tendency in the springtime to want to clean house and refresh. And, there could be some tie back to this, like clean out everything that you do not need or want in your life. Like cut these loose from you, and like start with a light burden into this new season. So some of the things that are going on here as well, like, so the Lord is going to send this plague. And one of the things that happened in the summertime or in the springtime in Egypt was the Egyptian kingship festival. And so there is a contrast here as well with what the Lord is going to do to strike even the house of Pharaoh with what is like what they would be hoping to do in the springtime, because the Lord has authority over kings and servants. He's authority over everybody. And so taking this festival and essentially the Lord is mocking the power of Pharaoh in this time. Yeah. So then let's pick up in verse 21. Sorry, I jumped around in my notes. And so I'm like, I said some things earlier than I anticipated to say them. And so now I'm like, well, fun. One of the things too is as we talked about house, like sharing from household to household for the lamb. For 7 days, no yeast is found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Like this, there are some festivals that like affect only the people of Israel, and there are some festivals that affect all of the people who live in the land. And here, the people of Israel aren't in the land yet, and so it's looking forward to when the foreigner among you is even in the land that God is going to bring the people to say, even the foreigner among you, they have to clear out the yeast. They have to do this, otherwise expel them from living among you. And so there's these different festivals will have different like things that these are required to do. But when we look at the nations and Israel's relationship to the nations, one of the key things to keep in mind is all the way back to the covenant to Abraham, that all nations of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. But the goal is also like, let the nations of the earth take on the community covenant with Israel to become more and more like Israel, as they would see the blessings of the Lord as Israel lived out covenant faithfulness. And so the law anticipates foreigners wanting to be a part of the community. And so there are these little anticipations that highlight that, to say they're going to want to be there, and these are the things that they'll have to do to be there. So keep that in mind as we go through Exodus and we look more at the law in the coming weeks and months. Verse 21, then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood in the basin, and put some on the blood of the top and on both sides of the door frames. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning, when the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians. He will see the blood on the top and sides of the door frame and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised. Observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Tell them it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our home when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. So they're taking these hyssop branches, which are kind of spongy enough to pick up blood and put it on the door frames of the house. The clear instruction, like, stay inside. There's really no reason, if the Lord's if they are following all these instructions, not a dog will sharpen its tongue in all of the land. Like, they're not going to even bark. There's nothing that would disturb you in the region where the people of Israel are living that would keep you from needing to go outside or checking anything. And so stay inside. Don't just trust me on this. Don't go out. And then we also see that the goal here is that this Passover would be something that they remember year after year after year, a lasting ordinance. And so the goal is to say, like, every springtime in the month of Nisan, on the 10th day, you do this. And when you look at the history of Israel, they don't do a good job of holding on to these lasting ordinances. But they were anticipating that your children will say, why are we doing this? What is this festival? And they are supposed to tell them the story of what happened. And so these kinds of festival observances and celebrations, they have all these little symbolic things that are going to happen. And so even why is the bread unleavened for 7 days? Well, it's because we left Egypt in a hurry. Why are we roasting the lamb instead of boiling the meat? Well, because roasting would take less time. Why do we have to wear our outer garments and coats and sandals and everything when we eat? Because we needed to be ready to go. All of these different elements that were tied to the events of this night. And so they were supposed to know the story so thoroughly that they would be able to tie in the whole meal to the dinner for the coming generations, an ongoing ordinance. And again, this is all tied back to God as a savior. He is saving his people. One commentator talks about this as, I'm just going to read this quote. From the point of view of the greater sweep of biblical revelation, the practice of teaching each new generation the meaning of the Passover helped guarantee the transmission of the proto-evangelium, which is all the way back to Genesis 3:16, the first gospel, throughout the historical continuum of the people of Israel until New Testament times, when the human divine lamb was slain once for all as part of the divine plan of redemption set in place before the earth as we know it existed. In other words, every Israelite properly instructed about the Passover should have also been, sorry, I have a notification popped up, should have been also partly prepared to expect a dying Messiah whose shed blood would provide a means of escape from death. It also contains something of a model of the biblical emphasis on the importance of parents teaching children, a responsibility well understood before the advent of universal education, but often neglected in present times in favor of professional education. So, this is one more key piece of God's saving work throughout history, all the way back to Genesis 3:16, where the Lord promised the woman that her descendant would strike the serpent's heel. And this is all part of that the rescuer would be struck in some way. So even thinking through the Messiah and what the Messiah is going to do, there would be some kind of suffering for the Messiah, and we see that develop later on in the prophets as well. So they're told they need to remember, they need to pass on to the next generation. All of this is being told before they actually experience the night. And so now we're going to look at that night, starting in verse 29. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, "We will all die." So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds, with the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt. They baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Now, the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. So the firstborn in all of Egypt die. First human, first animal, the firstborn. And, we don't need to read this as saying like there's a bunch of yelling and wailing. Like it's nighttime. So there could have been like these firstborns died in their sleep. But, if they had heard what the Lord was going to do, I would imagine many of these parents stayed up all night, wondering if this was actually going to happen. And I mean, this is a tragic story. Like what we're seeing here is tragedy. And like, why would this happen? And one of the key things is, Pharaoh made this happen. Like the hardness of his heart was a key part of what led to the loss of so many lives. And I've shared my theory that the firstborn of the household would have included Pharaoh, and so I don't know. Here, I mean, there's Pharaoh's house, who sits on the throne. His firstborn is dead. Whether or not Pharaoh died and this is his younger brother, I don't know. But if Pharaoh is the only firstborn who didn't die, that's a crushing, that could be a crushing weight as well. A survivor's guilt to say, wow, I did this. And, the night is still happening. Like the Lord says about midnight, I'm going to do this. So it's sometime in the night, this is going to happen. And, the Lord doesn't need to go house to house, like knocking on doors. Like it could have all happened all at once. And so when he summons Moses and Aaron and tells them to go, the strange thing is he says also bless me. He recognizes that he the God that Moses and Aaron serve is way more powerful than he could ever imagine. So when he says also bless me, he's asking for a little bit of the power from the God of Moses and Aaron. But when we go all the way back to when they got into Egypt in the first place, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And so, Pharaoh is the dominant partner in that conversation. Pharaoh should have been the one to bless Jacob, but Jacob is the more spiritually significant member in that whole dialogue back in Genesis. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and now here Moses is asked to bless Pharaoh, and we don't see him doing that. Like he doesn't say, and Moses did that, right? Instead, we just transitions over to the Egyptians urge the people to hurry and leave the country. They recognize that the people of Israel are, called to leave. Let's let them leave. And so they carry out what Moses told them to do. Go ask for the gold and silver and fine clothes. And they did. And so this huge wealth transfer from Egypt to Israel happens without any Israelite swinging a sword or doing anything. They just asked, can we have some gold and silver? And they said, yes, please take it. And so this plundering of the Egyptians turned the slave class of the Israelites into wealthy people overnight. And as they leave, they're carrying their dough and like their possessions and all the new possessions that they got from the people of Egypt. And so they are on the way out, and the narration here tells us like they were in Egypt for 430 years, and it says here it's to be in verse 41 at the end of 430 years to the very day. That doesn't necessarily mean like it was like the anniversary, the 430th anniversary when they came in is when they left it. The sense is from 430 years to now, like even like at this point, like so it's not like a precise anniversary. It's just like all the way to now. And so they leave, and again they're told to keep vigil, to watch, and to pray for the coming years. One of the other interesting things here in verse 38, many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. These many other people, who are those people that go up with them? And it could be some of the Egyptians left. Like they're like, we're out of here too. Could be that there are other Semitic people who were a part of the slave class in Egypt that also saw this as an opportunity to leave and to go with the people of Israel. One of the things that's going to happen is like the blessing of the nations. People from other nations are going to want to be a part of Israel. And so like this is all part of the promise to Abraham that they would be a blessing to the nations, that people would join them, that there would be a pathway to becoming part of the covenant community of the Lord. And so that's part of what's happening here, that they are coming along with the Israelites. Also, one of the questions that we have like is numbers, and are these numbers accurate? And that is something that people are debating. If you looked at, because this 600,000 men, and then working in like women and children, it would have been over 2 million people potentially, and 2 million people moving that quickly could be difficult. And so the people are questioning, like, is that number accurate? Is that the point of the number, is to be accurate? And ultimately the goal when we read the Bible is like the accuracy of numbers like this is not really the point of the story. The point of the story is multitudes of people were liberated on this day. And so sometimes there's a hyperbolic number where it's like more than we could count left. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. And one of the challenges with like these numbers is just like the land itself couldn't necessarily support that many people at the time. And so like where the Israelites lived, like that many people would have decimated the land. And so we just have to think through like, why is this number here? What is this number about? What do we want? What do we need to learn from this number? Is ultimately the multitude left. Many people left, and that is not like something that would be disputed. Is that a lot of people left? And so, all right, let's keep going. Verse 43. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal." So we're getting another explanation here. No foreigner may eat it. So we had an allowance for foreigners to be a part of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but they had to make sure they kicked out all of the yeast from their own houses. But here, the Passover is not for the foreigner among you. So no foreigner may eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. So the foreigner cannot, but the person who has been purchased to and brought into the household and been circumcised, they are now a part of your family. They may eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house, so no to-go boxes. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males of his household circumcised. So if a foreigner wants to do it, they all have to convert. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies both to native born and to the foreigner residing among you. All the Israelites did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. And so we have this guidance for who can participate in the Passover. You have to be a Jewish person. And so when it talks about they must be circumcised, that's essentially they must convert. They have to be a part of the covenant community. And the sign for the covenant is circumcision. And also, like you need to eat it in the house. And this is a important part for the Passover. Like the priest is not necessary for the Passover. This is something that the household was supposed to do. Later, the priest would get involved in Passover celebrations, but at this point, it's like household to household. And maybe your neighbor's house, bring them in if they can't eat the whole lamb on their own. But it is a sharing meal for your household, and that's sorry, my computer's talking to me. And so there's no real explanation here. So it's a sharing meal for the house. There's no explanation on why we shouldn't break the bones for the animal at this point. But when we look to the future, we do see that they followed these instructions. This is something that they did. And even when Jesus was crucified, the gospel writers look to the Passover and they say, like, look, Jesus is our Passover lamb. And John specifically points out that as Jesus was on the cross, not even any of his bones were broken, like to highlight how perfect he is as our Passover lamb. Okay, so that's a little bit about the participants. So let's look at the first part of 13 through verse 16. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. Egypt, human or animal. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today in the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day, hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observation will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time, year after year. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my newborn sons. and it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. So this is about dedication of the firstborn as a tie back to the Passover event. The way that Israel was rescued from slavery was the death of the firstborn of Egypt, but also tied to the preservation of the firstborn of Israel. And so the Lord is saying to the people, those firstborn are mine. They're mine. And ongoing throughout all of the history, like the firstborn of every household and every animal is the Lord's. And so there is a ritual sacrifice that is done with the animals, but then there is a sacrifice of an animal, a lamb, that is done for the firstborn sons of the people of Israel. Because nowhere in the Bible is it ever acceptable to sacrifice a human. That's important because the people of Israel will struggle with that later as they are tempted by the idolatry of their neighbors. But here, the Lord is pointing all of these truths out. Like the firstborn are mine, but you can redeem, which is a economic term for purchasing somebody from slavery. It's redeem. And so they are purchasing them on behalf of the Lord for the firstborn of every household. And again, tied back to the rescue of the people from Egypt and from slavery. And these are supposed to be signs to them, a sign on your hand and on your forehead. And later the people of Israel will take this to mean like they actually need to put like things on their foreheads and their hands, like little portions of the law. They would write them out and put them in little boxes on their hands or on their forehead. It's called a phylactery, if you are curious. And Jesus will actually make fun of that practice later. Like you've got these giant phylacteries on your forehead, but like you don't know the heart of the law, but you want people to think you've got it all figured out, and you, by the size of these giant things that you've tied to your head. But the firstborn of Israel, all of them, are to be dedicated to the Lord. And so it's interesting the way that the law around these festivals is interspersed with the narrative of the events. But as they are celebrating Passover for years to come, they would be reading these stories and talking about it. And so it makes sense to put how to observe these festivals in with the story that they're reading so that they are sure to do everything correctly to honor the Lord to the fullest extent. And so next week, we will see the people come all the way up to the Red Sea, and the Lord will work miracles on their behalf as Pharaoh is like, wait a second, why did we just let all our workers go? We should go get them. And so that's where we're going to be next week. So we look at these plagues as these signs to the people of Egypt, that the Lord is powerful and that he's releasing his people from slavery. The crossing of the Red Sea is another sign, and it's a sign for the people of Israel that the Lord is the one who fights on their behalf. And so with all that, are there any questions? Kind of went through a lot of text that was really around one major event, but yeah, any questions, thoughts?
Yeah. The yeast.
Mm-hmm.
What is the significance of the yeast? Is it just something God took and used, or does it have some kind of a significant meaning behind it?
Yeah, that is a good question. Yeast this is what Alec Moitier said in one of the commentaries, because it doesn't really explain here what's going on with the yeast. He's just like, take all the yeast out. The main point of what he does say is like, because waiting for bread to rise is going to take too long.
Right.
So you got to be ready to go, right? So Alec Moitier in The Message of the Exodus, The Days of Our Pilgrimage, and this is kind of a devotional kind of commentary. And so it's not as scholarly, dig deep on the language and stuff. He said it's not really until the New Testament that an explicit symbolism of leaven is enunciated in the Bible. And we see that in 1 Corinthians 5, 7 through 8. But once it is stated, it makes sense. The first Passover constituted a new beginning of enormous proportions. And inevitably, the emphasis continued. Paul, therefore, picking up on the New Testament insistence that the Lord Jesus is the Lamb of God, summons Christians to a decisive new beginning in Christ. And so that a little leaven works through the whole dough mentality, like that, this symbolism for Christians becomes the yeast is the sin that we need to like remove. And ultimately it's Christ who makes the removal of that possible for us. And another commentary, this is Alan Cole. He says, leaven seems to be a biblical symbol for corruption as well as of pervasive spread by fermentation, though the equations are not specifically made until the New Testament. And so like these are some connections that we pick up later, but it is not the main point in Exodus is like, you don't have time for your bread to rise. So you got to just be ready to go. So
I didn't know if there was just something in the yeast that was not safe or whatever.
no, they could use yeast. That's just this 1 week where they're not allowed to use yeast for the whole year. Like they just,
That's why I was wondering why yeast didn't seem to have any balance for it all.
yeah,
That's okay.
it's not
I'm just
a
curious.
health, it's not a health reason. It is more just a symbol. Like if you like bread, I love bread. And
Yeah.
if you are like, even in this Lenten season where we're, giving up things, like if you give up bread for Lent, like that's a hard order. But to say like every day of the year, except for 7 days, you can have just these delicious loaves of like good sourdough bread. Oh man, so good. But this 1 week, you have to eat crackers, saltine crackers, unsalted. So just teen crackers. Like you'll remember that week. Like it's like, oh
Yeah,
man, I get to
right.
eat so much good bread all the time, but now I just have to eat these dry crackers. Why? And like the kids would say, Mom, Dad, why are we only eating crackers? And you say, because it was the day,
Because
it was these days when the Lord led us out of Egypt and we left so quick, we didn't have time for our leaven to work through the dough. And so we removed the yeast from our bread for this 1 week to remember God's saving work. So, yeah.
That was the
Then-
best analogy, Jason.
With the saltine crackers?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
I
thank
love
you.
bread too, so I was like, yeah, I would totally remember that. That was awesome.
Teen crackers. And just for questioning me, no water.
There are fasts where they're not allowed to drink water, but this is not one of them. So I just found out, like, this is a thing my wife has done for years, I guess. Saltine crackers with butter on it.
Oh, yum.
Like,
Yeah, Dove makes matzah, which is basically saltines without salt. And he has done matzah with butter as a snack for years. It is his favorite thing.
Yeah, I just never have even thought about it, but Kathy does it all the time.
good.
So matzah is more in line with what this bread is actually going to be like.
Yeah, we have a case of it.
Yeah.
Butter makes everything better.
Totally.
I agree.
Totally.
I totally agree. I also just heard somebody talking about like brownies, and they would just put hot, like when the brownie's still hot, just put a pat of butter on that brownie and let it work its way in through. It's like, oh, that's how you lose a foot to diabetes, my friend, but it sounds good. So
I feel my heart beating just thinking about that.
And cinnamon rolls with melting butter on top.
oh man, yes.
Yeah.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this passage?
Yeah, I
Wait,
had
are you done? Are you done talking about butter there, Jason?
No, I mean, I'm always happy.
For
to talk about butter.
firstborn women, firstborn girls, they were all safe.
You know, that is a good question. And so it's one of those weird things where it's like every household even if they didn't have a firstborn son, like what the passage says is every household experienced this plague in Egypt. So like, is it only firstborn sons that died? So if there was a daughter and then a son, did that son die? Or like if a family only had daughters, was that firstborn daughter? Did that daughter die? I don't know. The text is not incredibly clear on that, but what we have is great tragedy, regardless. And so, in a patriarchal society, the son is the most important descendant. So that might be part of the emphasis on the son, is that your son, if your son dies, then your family is losing a significant heir. So, but whether or not firstborn daughters, or if only daughters, not totally clear. So
Did they have the firstborn? If they had firstborn daughters, did they get the redeemed thing? They get the tradition.
the redemption of the firstborn.
Yeah.
No, they would have been passed over.
Yeah. Again, so you're talking about in chapter 31, the Lord, when it says, consecrate to me every firstborn male, the first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. So Chris, I'm glad you asked that question, because like, consecrate to me every firstborn male. So that we know that males for sure, but the very next sentence, the first offspring of every womb. So it could be that like the Lord is saying, like, I definitely want all the firstborn males, but the first offspring of every womb belongs to me as well. And so
That'd be two then? Like if there was a boy and a girl?
well, no, the firstborn is the language here, the term in Hebrew is more womb breaker.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so whoever was first
Gotcha.
to break the womb. So yeah, but so we have the clear indication for firstborn males, but then also every offspring, the first offspring of every womb. So the first offspring is not necessarily a son; it could also be a daughter. But later on in the law, there are going to be purification rituals that after a woman gives birth, and there are distinctions for like purification for a son, purification for a daughter. Like it gets more specific later on, like how to do purification rituals after birth events. So here it's not as specific as we want, but again, the Bible is rarely as specific as we want when we want it to be specific. Sometimes it's it just is not playing the same game that we would be playing. So yes. So Jay sent me a message directly, and can I just say this? It's funny. Womb breaker sounds like a failed wrestler name. So yes. I agree, Jay. Yeah. Hebrew has some weird idioms. And so like the firstborn, like as a womb breaker, like that, like it's one of those idioms where it's like, yeah. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's what it is. So
it makes sense, but just when you said that womb breaker, all I could think of was like, wow, that sounds awful.
It really is. It really is.
Yes, as Chris, you have had children, so you have a whole different experience than myself here. And our children were removed. They were both emergency C-sections. So different. Yeah. I mean, however your kids are brought into this world, it is a traumatic event. This is what I had experienced.
The surprising thing was that I had more than one.
Right? Yeah. Oh, man. The joy of childbirth. So, yeah.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So in Exodus 12:23,
Hmm.
this was so interesting to me. So it says, when the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. And I was just so curious about like the language of the destroyer, because it just talked about how like the Lord is the one who's doing that, but that like he's not going to let the destroyer in. So I was just curious if you had read anything about what that meant or why that language was used.
Yeah. Let me just see. I do remember reading about it, but there is so the Lord is going is present in the land in a significant way. He is going throughout the household, like the land. The destroyer then could be like the angel of death that then goes into the house. So the Lord is directing the destroyer. But I did not put any of the notes on that specifically I didn't copy any of that in. So,
So you don't think it's Satan?
no, I don't.
Or you said destroyer. So is this a different angel than the angel of death?
It could, I mean, it could be. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all right.
Usually Satan is referred to as the adversary, not necessarily the destroyer. So I wouldn't think that he'd be the one referenced here.
Yeah. Satan
That would make sense.
Hasatan is the Satan, which means the accuser. So we call him Satan, but his name is the accuser, which again, wrestler name. But I'm pulling up this verse real quick. Exodus 12:23. When the Lord goes to the lights under the side of the door frame and passes over the doorway to prevent the destroyer. All right, I'm doing okay. This is gonna get dizzy for a second. I'm doing a Bible word study here. So, all right. So let us do this. Wait, no, come on, help me. Spoiler, destruction, snare. It's the Mashatit. Mashahit is the destroyer. So there it is, Bible word study. So ruin, destroyer, to destroy, ruin, to act wickedly, to destroy, to be corrupted. Let me see here. Yeah, annihilation. Let's do this. This is my favorite app on my whole computer. This is where I spend most of my time, is in this. Angel of the Lord, destroyer, noun. Fact book. This is Logos. It's the best. It works. Go faster. Go faster. Does this help? No. Okay. I don't know why that's taking so long.
I bet if you click on it a bunch of times, it'll go faster. Just throwing that out there. Yeah.
All right. That's not doing anything.
It works all the time for me.
Yeah. So I was trying to see if there was a specific name. No. A person who destroys or ruins or lays waste. So interesting.
I guess I just thought that it was kind of interesting that you used the word destroyer, because in a book that I read called Piercing the Darkness, one of the adversaries, one of the demons in the book, his name was Destroyer. And he was feared by all the other demons and angels alike.
Are you talking about the Frank Peretti book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fiction, Jay.
That is a fictional story. Yeah. But I do think that it could be an angel. One of the things that so the question was this Satan? And like Satan is distinct from the other angels. So this is a different angel than Satan for sure. And so as you, like in the list of the different ways that this is referred to also is raiding parties. Like the destroyer could be a force of destruction that comes into the land. And later in Jeremiah, the prophet, it says, I will send destroyers against you in 22:7. And then in Jeremiah 51:1, see, I will stir up the spirit of a destroyer against Babylon. And so like the Lord has this destructive force in his judgment in the prophets as well. And so the angels, like the destroyer is not evil, right? Like he's
like
directed
part
by
of
the
an
Lord.
army.
Yeah.
You have your different divisions that do certain things.
Right. Yeah. So
it
even
could just be a legion of destroyers that he brings with him into Egypt that he directs.
Yeah. I mean, one of it's a singular noun here.
Sure.
So like the Hebrew has a very clear plural, like so it doesn't seem like it's a plural here, but it could be that force of destruction. I don't know.
If it is
I'm
an angel
relearning all
or
the Hebrew.
angels, one thing that I've always thought about when it came to this was God grieves when certain things happen, like when people are lost, when people die not saved. Could you imagine being an angel tasked with destroying?
Yeah, that is an intense question, Jay. And I'm going to recommend something that I can't it's not for everybody. All right. But Kevin Smith, who is not a Christian, but he grew up Catholic, he has a movie called Dogma. And if you've seen Dogma, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck play destroying angels, and they're tired
I remember
of that job. So
yeah,
they basically run away from that job. So people are asking that kind of question. so it's out there, but it is one of those things where it's like, man, the angels who obey the Lord are operating in God's righteousness. They're doing what God tells them to do, but it's also like contrasts us to our own sense of fairness and right and wrong. And like, what is going on here? But again, all the way back to the purpose of all the plagues is God is displaying his power against Pharaoh. And it's a spiritual battle, not just a physical battle, but like Pharaoh also brought this on himself and his people, and the people like turn against Pharaoh because of his wickedness as well, because of his hard-heartedness. So it's this is one of those stories that's very complicated, and like ethically, like as a person who values life, like it's heartbreaking to me to read. Like this is what comes about when the systems of this world stand against the power of the Lord. The Lord wins. And that victory, it can be very heartbreaking. So
why does God punish all of the other families besides Pharaoh? And does he continue that on through, like right now? Are we all going to be punished because of our president, which would be like a Pharaoh?
well, so why
was there a purpose for it? Why wouldn't he but just punish Pharaoh himself? Because Pharaoh was the bad guy.
Yeah. So systemically, the systems of oppression in Egypt, it wasn't just Pharaoh who was benefiting from the systems of oppression.
Okay.
So Egypt had a guilt. The nation of Egypt had a guilt.
They had all been doing wrong then.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was something that
so it was just just the ones that were doing bad then. So like if I have children,
all of Egypt
bad, then all 10 children are going to be punished for that? I'm looking at it from a passing. Yeah, that must have been rotten then.
Yeah. It is so one of the things that the Bible has as a sense throughout is a corporate identity. We often read the Bible as individuals.
Yeah.
And we one of the challenges with English is we do not have a good English translation for you all, you plural. And so when we read scripture and we read just you in English, like you is me, right? And so like Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you. That you is not you alone. It's you all. I know the plans I have for you all. And so that's one of the challenges with our English reading is we read as individuals and we see individual emphasis where there is a community emphasis. And so Egypt is seen as a unit. Egypt is one. All of Egypt is bearing the guilt of Egypt. So Pharaoh is the head of Egypt, but everybody in Egypt is benefiting from Pharaoh's responsibilities. And so we see this in the people of Israel later. They go into exile. Was everybody in Israel like worshiping idols? Doubtful. But everybody in Israel was guilty of idolatry.
Okay.
And so like there's that corporate responsibility for the people that they carry together. So fast forward to your question about, are we going to be judged because of our president? Here's the interesting thing about Jesus. On the cross, and this is the Jason theory, okay? So I'm working it out still. On the cross, we understand that Jesus bore the sins of the world. He bore the punishment and the judgment for the sins of the world. Right. Will he hold those forever? And this is the question, because if he is bearing all the sins of the world forever, then there really is no end judgment.
Right.
But what we are told is now, therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so his act on the cross is holding back judgment for our sin until the judgment day, where all those who are in Christ Jesus, that judgment for sin will be passed over us. Whereas those who have rejected Jesus, they will then receive that judgment that Jesus has been holding.
Right.
So when we look at questions like, are we as like America being judged for the sins of our president? Jesus is holding all those sins, all that judgment right now. And so like the things that happen, like when Pat Robertson says like Hurricane Katrina is because of gay marriage, which is what he said. No. I don't think that's how God is working right now. I think that there are things that are like signs to us, like, hey, hurricanes are a big deal and we should pay attention. But we don't need to go and say like, this is God's judgment. That's God's judgment, because God's judgment is on Jesus until the judgment day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was good, Jason.
Cool. Yeah. I'm still working that out, but like that, like the imagery of judgment, like, because I grew up afraid of God's judgment all the time, and recognizing that Jesus is holding back judgment for me because I'm in him. Oh, how liberating is that? And it goes back to the Passover, like because the blood of Christ is over the doorframe of my heart, like the judgment of God is passing over me. And so I've been thinking about it. Wrestling with this stuff. There's a lot going on. So
well, keep
Bible
us
is beautiful.
Posted.
All right.
Keep us posted on your as you your thoughts as you develop.
Yeah, as you develop your theory.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it'll dribble and drabble out, like it'll happen over time. So but one of the things that like is a ongoing conversation is the theories of atonement. And so like, what did Jesus do on the cross? And so people will say it's this or this or this, but it's really like all of them. Like Like, did Jesus purchase us from slavery? Yes. Did Jesus defeat the power of sin and death? Yes. Does Jesus show us the example of God's love, and that draws us into a relationship with God? Yes. All of those are true. And people have been fighting over these theories of atonement forever. And so, like, it's not like trying to make a new theory of atonement, just trying to put them all together. And I have this cool book that I'm working through called The Mosaic of Atonement, and it's helping me as well. So I don't know if this guy already said the thing that I said just now, but I'll let you know because he's smarter than me. So yeah.